please.
Siobhán here. And then Kiegan. If you want to go, no, next to Siobhán because you're going to trade spaces.
Yeah.
And then
Where would you like us to?
here. Come here. Sur ce côté-ci, oui. Okay.
And then you should go.
A little bit tighter, and then you can come right here. Perfect.
Is there room for us?
Yes. If you guys can
Stack.
That was great. You guys moved.
She's done it before.
Une chance qu'on a plus de 2 mètres de distance obligatoire.
Just go like
Ah oui,
behind
maintenant,
them
tu vois
in
les
between.
photos de l'époque de la
Behind
pandémie.
them, your head in between. Same for you on this side. Right behind, like
Oui,
Diana,
traumatisme. Oui, c'est ça.
and 8. That should work.
Perfect. Bon après-midi. Je m'appelle Aidan Gilchrist-Blackwood et je suis coordonnateur du réseau canadien pour la reddition de comptes des entreprises. Notre réseau rassemble plus de 40 organisations de la société civile de divers secteurs partout au pays, unis en solidarité avec nos partenaires à l'étranger qui subissent des violations des droits humains trop fréquentes liées aux activités des entreprises canadiennes. Et j'ai l'honneur d'être accompagné aujourd'hui par 4 représentants des organisations membres du RCRCR, ainsi que par les députés Heather McPherson et Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay, qui ont travaillé ces dossiers de longue date depuis les collègues de tous les partis. And our members are gathered here today, united to denounce the government's decision to eliminate the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. This office, which was mandated to investigate allegations of human rights abuse by Canadian mining, oil and gas, and garment companies abroad, emerges from over a decade of advocacy by concerned citizens all over the country. Our members stood next to the government when it announced the creation of this office. We know it has a very important role to play in ensuring Canada's path forward in difficult times is grounded in respect for human rights, which is a basic expectation all Canadians share. We also know that necessary tools in this office's toolkit, real investigatory powers and independence, were never delivered, despite a government commitment. To be very clear, it appears this office was set up to fail. But the solution is to reinforce the office. It is not to eliminate it. The Canadian government has also positioned the Corps as part of its strategy to combat forced labour. And indeed, a significant number of cases brought to this office to date concern allegations of Canadian companies who are linked to forced labour practices. But it is puzzling to hear Prime Minister Carney suggest that the functions of the Corps will be replaced by a new government bill to strengthen import ban enforcement, when these two mechanisms have different functions, where the Corps is mandated to investigate all human rights abuses. So this moment then is also an opportunity. We call on the government to reverse course and, working in meaningful partnership with civil society, to reinstate an office that has the powers and independence that we have always called for and which it is always needed. Et pour adresser ces questions, je vais passer la parole à les personnes suivantes. En premier, Diana Martin, co-gestionnaire de MiningWatch Canada. Ensuite, Siobhán Vipond, vice-présidente exécutive du Congrès du travail du Canada. Ensuite, Kiegan Irish, chargé de plaidoyer de développement IP Caritas Canada. Ensuite, je vais passer la parole à David Matsinhe, directeur de politique et plaidoyer d'Amnesty International Canada. Et ensuite au député Heather McPherson d'Edmonton Strathcona et député Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay du Saint-Hyacinthe Bagot Acton.
Good afternoon. For more than 25 years, MiningWatch Canada has documented allegations of serious human rights abuses and environmental harm linked to Canadian mining companies operating abroad. We have stood with dozens of affected communities as they fight to stop the harm and seek accountability in Canada, where these companies are headquartered. Together with our partners in the Canadian Network for Corporate Accountability, we fought for an ombudsperson who could hear complaints, investigate wrongdoing, and provide remedy. Although the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, the CORE, lacked the independence and powers it was promised, it remained one of the few avenues for communities harmed by Canadian mining companies to seek accountability. Today, we condemn the federal government's decision to shut this office down. For years, Canadian embassies directed affected communities to bring their complaints to the Corps. Some did. For instance, one Indigenous human rights defender filed a complaint in 2023 against a Canadian mining company operating in Asia. The court accepted the case after finding grounds to believe Indigenous rights to self-determination may have been violated. The complaint is now abandoned. We understand there are at least 24 active cases that can no longer move forward. These are people who came forward in good faith, investing extraordinary time, energy, and courage. They were not warned the office would be closed. At a moment when Canada is accelerating mining at home and abroad, accountability mechanisms are being weakened. The global rush for critical minerals is increasing pressure on communities and ecosystems, making oversight more important than ever. Closing the core does not make these human rights abuse allegations disappear. The answer is to strengthen accountability, not dismantle it. Communities deserve better. Canada can and must do better.
Thank you. We are deeply disappointed by the government's decision to eliminate CORE. We as the labour movement believe that fundamental rights matter, no matter where you work or where a company operates. Canada's unions, Canada's workers were instrumental in creating CORE to hold corporations accountable. Years of work and collaboration went into building CORE, fighting alongside allies, civil society organizations, and communities. Building on Canada's international reputation as a leader on human rights, we knew Canada's approach to corporate accountability needed to go further, and collectively continued to push for stronger oversight and enforcement and respect for workers' rights. But we've seen the government slowly go back on its commitments, ultimately now eliminating the instrument piece of regulation entirely. CORE exists because people need to trust that our supply chains don't rely on forced labor. The Ombuds Office is where those harmed by the actions of Canadian companies abroad could speak up and get justice. Let's remember Rana Plaza. 13 years ago, over 1,100 garment workers lost their lives because basic protections were ignored, mixed with little or no accountability. More than 2,500 injured, 1,100 lost their lives. Let that sink in. At the time, Canada said we could not allow tragedies like this to happen again. That was one of the driving forces behind calls for stronger corporate accountability around the world, including here at home. What message does this decision send today? If workers' rights are violated in a mine operated by a Canadian company abroad, who do we turn to now? If livelihoods are threatened by actions of a Canadian corporation, who listens? And what, if any, not if, another tragedy like Rana Plaza happens, what will be Canada's answer? That we dismantle one of the few mechanisms available to seek accountability? Canadians want to be proud of how our companies operate around the world. For years, Canada has proven itself as a leader on human rights, workers' rights, and responsible business accountability. Eliminating the CORE risks undermining that reputation and sends a strong message to everyone, to workers, communities, and our international partners. Canada should be known not only for the companies that operate around the world, but for our willingness to hold them accountable when fundamental rights are violated. Accountability is not a burden on responsible businesses. It is part of what gives Canada credibility and respect on the world stage. But that means having meaningful mechanism to investigate abuses, hear complaints, and hold corporations accountable when they fail to respect fundamental rights. Here today, representing 3 million workers, we urge the government to reconsider this decision and commit to protections for workers and communities affected by Canadian companies abroad. Because workers and human rights do not stop at the border.
Bon après-midi. Développement IP, Caritas Canada se joint à d'autres organisations de la société civile et au RCRCE pour dénoncer la décision du gouvernement canadien de supprimer le bureau de l'Ombudsman canadien de la responsabilité des entreprises, le OCRE. Le DPCC s'est engagé à mobiliser des milliers de membres bénévoles à travers le Canada comme partie d'un vaste mouvement populaire de Canadiennes convaincus que les acteurs représentant leur pays dans le monde devraient se comporter d'une manière qui reflète leurs valeurs. Des valeurs fondées sur la solidarité, les droits humains et le respect de l'environnement. Pendant plus que 10 ans, ce mouvement a milité pour la création d'un médiateur indépendant doté des pouvoirs et de l'autorité nécessaires pour mener de véritables enquêtes sur les signalements d'abus. Plus d'un demi-million de signatures ont été recueillies sur une pétition et de nombreuses mobilisations publiques ont eu lieu. Au lieu de s'appuyer sur ce remarquable activisme et cette participation au processus démocratique, la suppression de l'OCRE plutôt que son renforcement constitue un véritable coup porté au pouvoir du peuple de ce pays. Conscient que les Canadiens souhaitent répondre aux enjeux complexes de ce moment historique, nous estimons que toute transformation économique menée par ce pays doit s'appuyer sur nos valeurs communes. Nous nous joignons à l'appel lancé au gouvernement canadien pour qu'il tienne compte de la volonté de son peuple et rétablisse le OCRE doté des pouvoirs légaux nécessaires en tant qu'institution essentielle de contrôle des entreprises. Merci.
Amnesty International, along with our partners, have long called on Canada to hold Canadian companies accountable for human rights abuses here at home and across the world. And let us remember that the Canadian government itself once cited the core as evidence of Canada's commitment to domestic and international human rights obligations. It held up the office as proof that Canada was willing to confront human rights abuses tied to Canadian corporations abroad. But what we see today as the abolition of the core is that it's not an isolated incident or decision. It is part of a wider and deeply troubling pattern of rollbacks on Canadian values that Canada is internationally known for, such as human rights, labor protections, and environmental responsibility. At the very moment when communities are demanding justice, when workers are demanding dignity, and when the planet is sounding the alarm, Canada is retreating from even the modest measures of accountability it once claimed as progress. That matters because the core was never enough to begin with. It needed stronger powers, and Canada was urged again and again to make it fit for purpose. Instead of strengthening accountability, this government has chosen to dismantle it. And that sends a loud message across the world that Canada is willing to benefit from corporate power while turning away from the harms that such power can produce. More than ever, this is the time for Canada to step up, to choose courage over convenience, justice over impunity, and human dignity over profit at any cost. All social justice traditions teach that a society is judged by what it protects and whom it sacrifices. As Canadians, we must decide who we are, and let us choose wisely who we are. We can continue down the road of retreat or honor our domestic and international human rights obligations by building real accountability, real protection, and real respect, protection, and remedies for human rights, labor rights, indigenous rights, and the living world. We are here today to insist that we choose justice.
Thank you very much. My name is Heather McPherson. I am the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona, and I am also the Foreign Affairs critic for the New Democratic Party of Canada. And I am so grateful to be here today standing with these incredible representatives who have been fighting for years, if not decades, to ensure that Canada lives up to its obligations around the world. And I want to be extraordinarily clear. Canadians deserve to know that corporations that are flying the Canadian flag are acting in a manner that respects the values, the principles, and in fact, the law of Canada. And that's not happening right now. And the decision by this administration, the decision by Mark Carney and the Liberal government to end the core position, to end the core ombudsman, to take that role away is disgraceful. As has been mentioned, it is one more example of how this administration puts profit above the care of people. The limited value that the core ombudsman had to protect Indigenous people, to protect women, to protect rural communities, to protect human rights defenders, has been stripped away. Instead of strengthening an office that this country needs, instead of strengthening the oversight to ensure that Canadian companies are acting appropriately, this government chose to take that away. This government left those that had risked their lives to speak up in the protection of the environment, of their communities, of water, of human rights, have left them behind. It's shameful, and every single Canadian should know what this government is choosing to do. This comes on the back of decision after decision to cut international development, to cut supports for a feminist foreign policy, to cut supports for corporate responsibility, to cut supports to help with forced labor legislation. All of this right now shows an alarming trend. A government that doesn't care about the rights of people, doesn't care about Canadians, cares only about profit. Thank you.
Bonjour, mon nom est Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay. Je suis le député indépendant de la circonscription de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte-Acton. J'ai déposé il y a quelques semaines une pétition concernant l'Ombudsman. On peut se douter bien sûr qu'on n'aura pas de réponse satisfaisante en cette matière. Faisons un petit peu d'histoire. Alors, en 2018, suite à plusieurs témoignages, plusieurs cas qui ont été documentés, qui ont été pas juste rapportés, mais qui ont été documentés, de violence, de violation des droits de la personne qui aurait été commise par des compagnies canadiennes à l'étranger, suite à des cas documentés de pollution de l'air, d'empoisonnement de l'eau, de violence avec envers des populations locales, le gouvernement de Justin Trudeau a dit « Parfait », en 2018, a dit « Parfait, on va arriver avec quelque chose ». C'était la création de l'Ombudsman en question, dont il est question aujourd'hui, de feu l'Ombudsman. Or, moi, déjà, je trouvais que c'était une réponse un peu faible parce qu'il aurait mieux valu, à mon sens, une commission d'enquête indépendante du pouvoir politique, capable de faire ses propres enquêtes, même quand elle ne reçoit pas une plainte. L'Ombudsman, c'est juste en cas de plainte. Mais là, on a découvert assez rapidement que cet ombudsman-là n'avait même pas le pouvoir de convoquer des témoins et n'avait pas non plus le pouvoir d'exiger la production de documents. Donc déjà, on pouvait dire que c'était un chien de garde qui n'avait pas de dents, un peu de choses près. Comme on le dit au Québec, ça ne fait pas des enfants forts, ça. Là. Et là, par la suite, comme on le sait, depuis environ 1 an, si je ne m'abuse, le poste était vacant. Il n'y avait personne. Probablement plus qu'1 an même. Le poste était vacant. Il était inoccupé. Donc, on pouvait se douter que ça mènerait tout simplement à cette abolition pure et simple. Le gouvernement Carney nous a dit alors, oui, mais on a une loi sur le travail forcé qui s'en vient. Je m'en réjouis. J'ai moi-même déposé une telle loi après des années de promesses brisées du gouvernement en cette matière, le projet de loi C-251. Je m'en réjouis qu'il y ait cette loi-là. Mais ça n'agit tout simplement pas sur la même chose. C'est complémentaire. Quand on parle d'importation des biens issus du travail forcé, c'est à la frontière. Quand on parle de comportement des compagnies à l'étranger, ça le dit tout simplement dans mon préambule, c'est à l'étranger. Donc, c'est autre chose. Ce sont deux aspects. C'est complètement différent. Donc, finalement, ce que cela nous montre, c'est finalement que Mark Carney, c'est Justin Trudeau, mais qui fait même plus semblant.
Merci tout le monde. Thanks, everyone. And so we'll now open up to questions.
Hi, Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press. I'm just trying to understand some of the timeline here. It was a comment last Thursday where Carney said this had been eliminated. I'm just curious if any stakeholders that were interacting with the office had had any sense that that was coming. It seems like people were doing fairly substantive work to get these briefs ready, only to learn that it had apparently been closed. And do we have any sense of when this thing actually was eliminated?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start with that, but I would invite other folks to jump in and also provide your experiences. In short, in terms of the timelines, as far as we understand, there was no communication with complainants. We've seen several complainants voice publicly that they received no communication that this office was going to be closed, despite, again, the tremendous amount of work that goes into preparing a complaint. What that means in choosing this strategy against other strategies that you might be choosing to defend your lands and your livelihoods. So no indication that communities were informed in advance. And the only information we know at this point that's been communicated is that in the press conference where this decision was announced, the Prime Minister communicated that the decision had been made some months ago. And so that, I think, is also just incredibly shameful, knowing that a decision was made, but no one bothered to communicate it to complainants who put their trust in the office. And as my colleague Deanna mentioned as well, there's documented instances of Canadian embassy officials encouraging communities to also approach this office and put their trust in it. So knowing that the government was encouraging folks to make use of this office while not communicating basic information about the status of its future is really concerning. I'll perhaps pause there and invite other folks if you'd like to add to that answer.
I have one quick comment on. So Dylan, one thing I want to make clear too is that this has been an issue for parliamentarians for some time. So this was a study that was undertaken in the subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the International Human Rights Committee, and that was looked at in 2023. And clear recommendations were brought forward and accepted by the House of Commons to strengthen the core role, to strengthen the office, to give the office the ability to compel testimony and witness. And so the fact that the government has a parliamentary committee recommending that we do more to strengthen this and then shut it down is, I think, another example of how this government's not listening.
And I would just add in terms of the timing, when we're on the verge of looking at international agreements of trade with different countries, and some of them who have, questionable human rights records, we know that we don't want Canadians to not be able to trust that everything in our supply chain, that everything that we use is coming from a good place, whether it is human rights, it's workers' rights, it's environmental rights, that needs to be there. And we also need to have a mechanism to bring those complaints forward. So when we're on the verge of trying to open our doors to more places, this is absolutely the wrong time to not be listening to the recommendations of the Parliamentary Committee, but also not giving an opportunity for Canadians and those harmed to have a place to make a complaint.
And just on a similar note, I'm curious about any active investigations. I just want to make sure I'm on solid ground here. My understanding is that folks were still submitting stuff and didn't hear back, but then there were other folks that had communication with the office after the departure of Ms. Mayerhofer, and I guess that's just on ice now.
That's right. Yeah, cases have been left in limbo. Really, from what we know, there's really just been this period now because we've had there was an interim. The office was left empty fully for a year, the position of ombudsperson, and prior to that there was an interim ombudsperson, as you mentioned, and yes, cases have really been in limbo throughout that period. There were some communications that were happening during the interim period, certainly, but for the year that the ombudsperson has not had the actual position filled, there's been no ability for the office to actually advance complaints. So that for that entire year, there's been nothing. But again, invite other folks to comment here.
Sorry. Put a microphone in front of a politician. I think the important thing to keep in mind, though, is that for some of these populations to bring forward a complaint is risking their lives. It's extraordinarily dangerous for them to do that. And yet they were encouraged to do that. That was a pathway in which they were able to access justice. And there are 22 cases that are still outstanding that they have put their case together. They have presented that case to the office and are being left in limbo. We have asked people, Canadians have asked people around the world to risk their lives, to put their safety at danger so that they can defend their communities, our planet against Canadian companies, and they have been left in the lurch without any access to justice.
Hi, my name is Regina Alonso. I'm with Above Ground. I just want to say really quickly, you can check online, but as far as I know, as recent as yesterday, the CORE website still had an email address and phone number that you could contact to make a complaint. There's no, this office is closed or in the process of shutting down. So people who haven't seen Carney's press conference last week or our press conference today may not be aware that the office is actually closed, who want to submit a complaint.
My understanding is what is left is this this bill that will take a substantial amount of time, and that relates to forced labor, and that there's some OECD mechanism that we're part of. And then when it comes to other things like environmental concerns or, folks get evicted because of a mine, that's not forced labor. What do we have left? And what mechanisms, what's the shortfall in the OECD mechanism and the law that's coming through?
Yeah. The short answer is we have very little that's left. There are very, very few mechanisms in Canada that can be used when your human rights are violated by a Canadian company abroad. And so we do have on paper this office you mentioned, the national contact point. It is evidence has proven for an over 20-year period that this is simply not an effective human rights office. Some complainants have found that they've actually made their experiences worse by trying to approach this office. There are fundamental deficiencies with its mandate and operations in its current form. So that's not a good option. Really, one thing, and for members of the CNC, we've been campaigning for many years now in addition to campaigning around the Ombudsperson for legislative change that would create mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation responding to that legal gap. So creating a clear legal obligation in Canadian law for Canadian companies to be held accountable for human rights violations abroad. But in the absence of such legislation, the mechanisms currently available are slim to none. And it's really deeply shameful, and I think should be concerning for everyone who is watching today.
If I may add, the Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise and the National Contact Point have different mandates. For 26 years, the National Contact Point has not conducted independent investigations, and it hasn't made any findings of fact. So. And the government has received a lot of recommendations on how to strengthen the national contact point, and it hasn't responded to those requests. And as a result, the Canadian Network for Corporate Accountability advocated for 10 years to have this office of the Ombudsperson to fill that gap.
I'd also welcome just a broader comment on Canada when it comes to human rights. This is a government that the foreign minister has put human rights as one of the 3 pillars of the foreign policy ever since the UN speech. We're still a candidate for the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. I'm wondering what the rhetoric we've seen since Thursday and this bill, what is the message to people in other countries when they're looking at our human rights approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the message is very clear that I think the government is not living up to its stated commitments on human rights. Point blank, the government is turning its back on people who are experiencing human rights violations linked to Canadian companies. Canada has obligations internationally in terms of our human rights conduct that we are simply not meeting. Full stop. And so it is when we're looking at the conduct of Canadian companies abroad, it is fully a miss right now in terms of there's a real absence of any mechanisms with teeth that can hold our companies up to the kinds of human rights standards that are required. And invite other folks to jump in here as well.
Thank you. I just want to offer another perspective to add to what my colleagues have just said. You know, it's often said that don't listen to what a person says. Watch at what they do, because their actions speak much louder than the words. It's clear in the global community, in the international community, that the actions of governments, in particular in this case, the actions of the Canadian government, speaks much louder, sends a stronger message than the words they can utter at the United Nations. All those words, if they are not matched by concrete action, they are meaningless. In addition to that, before I immigrated to Canada, I came from Southern Africa in Mozambique. And the global, beautiful image that Canada has when you look at it from there is so marvelous, beautiful, and you wish to live here. It's a big disappointment to see what Canada is doing, not forced by anyone, not coerced by anyone, but through political choice to undo this global image that Canada has. It doesn't make sense. Just one last note. It's often said that when a multinational corporation go to the global south to invest, they are taking a risk. They are risking their capital. But think of it in the perspective of those communities that host these multinational corporations and their mining operations. They are risking their very lives because the ecosystem on which they depend to make a living, to have their culture, to define who they are, is all put on the line. Their waters, their soils, their air, everything is put on the line. So ask yourself, who is risking what here?
Absolutely. Excellent. I think we've spent the last couple of years as Canadians asking, what does it mean to be Canada? What does it mean to be Canadian? What are those values? We hear speeches internationally from Canadian folks that are in line with that, talking about the importance of workers' rights, talking about the importance of our leadership role internationally, but at the same time, making actions at home, like dismantling the core, like undermining the right to bargain and looking at that. And what this will turn into without our attention and putting something, not just core back in place, but a better version of core in place, is that we turn our supply chains into a hear no evil, see no evil, but profit from the evil system. That's not Canadian. So we need to hold the government accountable to what they say internationally is what they need to show at home, because that flag is going to be tarnished if we keep allowing these actions to be made. I think we're done.
Right, that's all the time we have.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Merci.